G'day, Greg Clarke from the Centre for Public Christianity. I'm speaking to you in the early morning of April 4, a date that should mean something at least to the U2 fans out there. It's a lyric from their song Pride. Early morning, April 4, a shot rings out in the Memphis sky. Well, Pride was written, as you probably know, to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr., the great American Christian activist who died on that morning. Except he didn't die on that morning because Bono stuffed up the lyric, and sometimes he sings early evening April 4 when he feels like correcting himself. But Martin Luther King was assassinated on the evening of April 4, 1968, 40 years ago today. He was shot the day after he had delivered his famous "I've been to the mountaintop" speech, which you can listen to on YouTube. Just type in Martin Luther King and you'll find it. By saying he's been to the mountaintop and has seen the promised land, Martin Luther King invokes the biblical character of Moses and that whole Bible story. Because Moses was the great leader of Israel, the one the Bible tells us led them through the desert after they'd escaped slavery in Egypt, off to the land of Canaan which God had promised to them. If you don't know the story, you can read it in the Bible in the book known as Deuteronomy. It's about 5 books in. Well, the promised land for Martin Luther King is the image for the fulfilment of his dream for humanity. His "I have a dream" speech, given 5 years earlier, is an even better known one than the "I've been to the mountaintop" address. Try YouTube again and you'll find that. But this phrase, "I have a dream," has been used and misused by advertisers to sell all sorts of visions and schemes. But Martin Luther King had a dream that human beings would one day unite as brothers and sisters, doing away with divisions and working together, living together. He says praying together and enjoying liberty. It's a great dream. Well, 40 years on, how's it going? It is tempting to be a doomsayer, but you would have to say that there have been some wins. 40 years on, there have been some great developments in racial relations and equality of persons in the USA and in many places around the world. It's no accident that Barack Obama has been connecting himself with Martin Luther King as he vies for the Democratic candidacy. America seems to be on a track towards the fulfilment of Martin Luther King's dream rather than away from it. This is a great development over 40 years or so, but don't hear me wrongly. Human beings all over the place may still be racist, but it's harder now to legislate racism. People get jailed for racist crimes. It's seen as antisocial to be racist, and your racism, if you have it, has to be more hidden and more shameful, as I believe it should be. In Australia, we've seen some race-related rioting in recent years, and I'm thinking of events at Cronulla. But those events demonstrated that being racist now is hardly acceptable. It was hardly an acceptable scene down there at Cronulla. It's considered wrong, and few people would be happy to say they believed one race is actually better than another. Wouldn't they?
You're listening to the vodcast for the Centre for Public Christianity. For more great content, why not subscribe at publicchristianity.org.
Well, maybe I'm naive or an optimist or just wet or something or all of the above, but my own confidence may have something to do with my faith in what Jesus did and said, and how I believe that God's plans can't be derailed. I expect the issue of racism to always be a bit of a moral roller coaster for the human race, but let's have a quick look at what the Bible does have to say on this topic. You see, the early followers of Jesus taught against racism in a way that was profound and radical for its day. I mean, Jesus set the example by talking with people from the so-called unclean, unacceptable groups, the lepers, the foreigners, the wanton women, the tax collectors, all these unacceptable groups. But Jesus' followers over time worked out that the social divisions that humans see as so important, be they gender or race or class or even religious ranking, were actually not so special in God's eyes at all. I mean, God enjoys difference and diversity, but not in a way where any one group is better than another. You can be different without being better or worse. In Christianity, men, women, blacks, whites, Indigenous peoples, recent settlers, migrants, those who've been here a little longer, are all considered equal before God. I'm thinking of Bible passages such as the letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 28, for those who are interested in reading it. What is it that makes us equal in God's eyes? Well, it says there, we're all equally in need of the grace of God. None of us is better than another. In fact, we're all part of a world that passage of the Bible says is a prisoner to sin. We're our own worst enemies. It's quite well known now that Martin Luther King was no saint himself. But when you understand your own failings, it's easier to consider others as equals. It's when you think of yourself as superior that you start to rationalise to yourself an attitude such as racism. Well, amazingly, Martin Luther King tells his audience that although he's seen the promised land, like Moses, he might not get there with his people. Like Moses, who died before entering the land of Canaan with the Israelites, Martin Luther King seems to kind of predict his own death before his dream of equality and peaceful relations between people of all colours could be attained. But he says it doesn't matter, again citing a passage from the Bible. He says, "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." I wish I could do it like him. But it was his confidence in God's goodness and God's intention to move the world towards peace and justice and contentment that enabled Martin Luther King to be so sure in the face of all the horrific segregation and vilification that he witnessed. It's a confidence in the Lord, in God and in Jesus that enables the kind of social vision that Martin Luther King had. See, Christians believe so completely that Jesus really did pave the way for peace through atoning for the sins of the world, as we say, that we can patiently wait and work towards the kind of world that Martin Luther King, and indeed the Bible and plenty of people everywhere, desire. It's not only Christians who work for peace, and I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but I've tried to at least outline where I understand the rationale for equality and peace to come from. It comes from seeing ourselves all as sinners and all in need of grace. And Christians see the source of that grace as Jesus the Christ. "Blessed are the peacemakers," said Jesus, "for they shall be called sons and daughters of God."